Welcome to the Lending Forward podcast, brought to you by Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group. This is your home for real discussions about the mortgage and housing industry. Our hosts are here bringing you firsthand accounts from people at the heart of the business. And we're chatting with professionals from all corners of the industry as they help cultivate transparency around the future of the industry we love. Together, we are lending forward all we know to you. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. Let's dive in.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Bill Hitchcock here, Senior Vice President of Business Development at Atlantic Bay Mortgage, and welcome to this next episode of Lending Forward. As always, we're excited to have you and excited to have our guests on to hopefully deliver great information and content for you that helps you in this crazy industry that we all call home. So I'm lucky enough today to have Rich Binsacca on, and Rich is the editorial director at ProBuilder magazine and also editorial director at Endeavor Business Media. Welcome, Rich. I know that you wear a lot of hats in that role, and I'm sure you can kind of dive into it a little bit more. But in that role that you have, being in kind of both of those groups, I'm sure you've seen a number of different things around the builder world and how it impacts our industry. So welcome, and I'm excited to have you on today.
That's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully I can meet that expectation.
Yeah. We don't want to set the bar too high, right? We'll under promise and over deliver, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of kind of great banter back and forth and some content that we can kind of share out. Rich, I know there's a lot that we want to get to, but one of the things I was just kind of thinking of it as we were kind of prepping and talking some sports talk, being Raiders and Steelers fans. I'll let our audience kind of guess, who's which. But when you're looking out in the market right now, kind of what's kind of keeping you up at night when you're getting ready to come on here, and you're probably like, gosh, I hope Bill doesn't ask me about that. But what's that thing that right now is kind of the buzz that you're seeing in the editorial work?
As an editor or as in the housing industry?
I'd say as an editor right now.
I think it's a challenging market. It just is. We are fortunate to be in a fairly tight niche in our business to business or B2B realm, and certainly even a B2B realm is a little bit more advantageous than, say, the consumer realm, which is just in chaos. I mean, honestly, it's just so uncertain how traditional media is going to survive. What's going on with whether it's AI or social media or just so many other outlets of news and kind of news and just, whatever somebody wants to post wherever. I think that, the whole profession of journalism is being challenged and being, democratized, which on its surface sounds pretty good. But honestly, if you're not someone who's dedicated to being a journalist, you don't trained in it, you don't know the ethics or follow the ethics of it. It's you get grouped in with kind of bad actors and folks that are just kind of spouting whatever they want to spout, and it's taken as gospel. So on the B2B side, and specifically in housing, I mean, we're fortunate to have a niche. We certainly have a lot more competition than for eyeballs and audience than we've had in the past. And again, there's a lot of outlets for content. Some of it accurate, some of it not. But we're competing with all of that, and need to be better, I think, at adjusting to that. And I think Endeavor Business Media, which is our publisher of ProBuilder and Custom Builder and the other brands that we have in that space, we are looking to make adjustments and be a little bit more nimble, be a little bit more daily, frankly, which is such an ironic thing because I got into magazines because I didn't want to do daily newspapers. I tried that, and I was like, I don't want. I'd rather write long stories and do some good journalistic work than reporting game stories, which is what I wanted to do, was be a sports writer. So it's a different world, and we're trying to adjust. And I think our job, really ultimately, is to continue to be audience first. Really know our audience, know what they want, hopefully anticipate what their problems are, what their challenges are. And we survey them a lot to find that out. And then also be accurate. really be accurate and precise, and then also good storytellers. And I don't think that that's a conflict. I think that's just good writing. I mean, I think you can't tell a story, you're not going to get people engaged in an article or a podcast or a video or whatever, to really get what you're trying to say, the information you're trying to impart. So yeah, it's a challenge for sure. And it's, I'm older, so I got to try to keep up.
Well, I also assume that advocacy is a big part of that as well. Having that, when you look at for, the builders and the trades, for them to have that, that advocate that's out there speaking on their behalf. So can you touch on that a little bit, how you're seeing, ProBuilder and Endeavor, take on, that heavy lift?
Well, I think, I do. I don't know if I mean, I don't know if I'd characterize it as advocacy. I think that we certainly want to support our industry, and we want to make sure that they, that it's recognized as an important, and I think it's gaining importance, frankly, in the federal or kind of the national, more so than it has in the past. Just because we've got some challenges that are affecting a lot of people, affordable housing being one, homeowners insurance being another, which is tied to affordability, and resilience, building resilience in areas, not just in the coastal areas, but throughout the country. There's threats, increasing threats of that. So I think it's getting more attention, but I think, I don't feel a responsibility to necessarily advocate for the industry. I feel an obligation to basically, reach my audience with what they need to hear, and be the best source of information, hopefully, that they rely on. We want them to rely on us versus others, and really just certainly hold up the industry when it does well, but also hold it into account when it doesn't. And I think that that's a respect that I hope that we earn among our readers, whether they're happy with what we report. That's not great news, or certainly happy that we report good news, and we try to do both.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that ties in to kind of like the next question that I had for you was, right now there's so many different things that are happening in the home building industry, and it's impacted by interest rate hikes, tariffs, all different types of innovations that are happening. So, right now, for when you're working with your team, back back there at the office, kind of what are the biggest forces that you're seeing that are kind of shaping the home building industry, today, that really are, impacting, not just where we are now, but where we're going?
Well, I think certainly, well, I think the biggest impact is just right now, it's just uncertainty. I mean, if you look at just the data, the number of permits, starts, closings, sales, they're all down or trending down from last year. They just are. And I think there's, we're seeing a shift in the market from, especially in top tier markets, to more of a buyer's market, where large builders, especially the public builders, large private builders and large regionals are discounting pricing and offering incentives like mortgage rate buydowns and free or discounted options, and upgrades that they wouldn't have done 2 years ago, a year ago even. And they're just trying to shift that inventory so that they can generate cash flow and satisfy their shareholders and their profit margins. And so it's an interesting shift in those markets, and in second tier markets, that's where kind of people are trying to find affordability and trying to find supply that meets those needs. I think that, we've got 10 months of supply right now of housing, new housing. And to me, that tells me there's not really a supply problem. There's certainly, what it is an affordable housing supply problem.
Right.
And I think that, that level, entry level, starter, whatever you want to call it, smaller homes, higher densities, isn't where, frankly, the money is right now for builders. But it's shifting to where the money's going to be no longer, or at least not as prevalent, at the higher ends. The move ups, the luxury. I don't count custom because that's a whole different business model. But certainly from production housing standpoint, we're seeing those kind of shifts, and I think that what builders are telling us and have told us, for a long time is that they want to streamline their operations, want to get more efficient. And they're doing that by at least showing interest in things like, offsite construction, different construction methods like SIPs or ICFs.
Yeah.
They're certainly getting into digital sales tools and documentation of construction documents. It's kind of digitizing those and making those a little bit more streamlined. And certainly investing in business software. We see all of that, which all rolls up into saving money, saving time, and streamlining operations. So I think that the biggest thing is just that nobody really knows what's going on or what's going to happen, and that's just general macroeconomics, not just housing economics.
Well, when you touched on before, when you said about the 10 months of inventory, do you also see that as an issue around land and actually, because I was at a conference a couple months ago, and I think that was one of the big topics was the inventory issue wasn't so much around being able to build. And, there weren't as many supply chain issues as there were in past years, things of that. Even though trades were they were still an issue, that wasn't as big of a factor. But it did seem like it was a lot of it was tied to having available land and lots. Are you seeing that, or is that something that ProBuilder and Endeavor are touching on as well?
Absolutely. And I think that you have to understand that lots, well, if you ask a public builder, and to be honest, the big publics, they're all big. All the publics are big, but the large private regionals as well, or large private nationals. I mean, they came out of the recession and the pandemic, very well positioned in terms financially. They had cash on the books, they had low debt, and they basically now have a lot more leverage and are using that leverage to buy up land. And the middle size and smaller production builders can't compete. They just can't. They're either going to build within those communities that these large builders are buying or developers are buying, or they're got to look for something else. And I think that the available land for a middle-sized or smaller production builder is a huge issue, and it is hurting production because they just even the land they can get, it doesn't pencil out to what they think buyers want and what cities or municipalities are going to allow, which is higher densities. I mean, you've got to fight that fight if you want to build in that. So I think what's going to happen is it's a little bit like the overall economy. You're seeing mid-sized builders, mid-sized production builders getting squeezed like the middle class. I mean, it's just not as volatile as reliable a business model as it used to be, where you could go in and compete, especially in larger markets, but even in tertiary markets where large builders are going. So I think they're going to have to turn to infill lots. I think they've got to find smaller lots that big builders don't want, some enough volume for them to be interested in. They've got to get it to pencil out. It's less expensive in terms of cost, but not per unit cost if they're building single family detached. So they've got to think about attached or even low-rise multifamily, something higher density that's going to make that pencil, and then they've got to fight that political fight. But I see cities turning and saying, look, we need affordable housing, and if it's in town, if it's a small project, we'll allow increased densities. So I'm not sure that answered the question, but that's kind of where I see land trends going, while the bigger guys are out in suburbia, exurbia, gobbling up land and building communities out there, and that's where they need to go because that's where the volume is.
No, yeah, definitely answered it because I what I'm seeing though is it's kind of like that proverbial thread that's that's hanging off your favorite sweater, and you start pulling it, thinking that it's gonna pull that thread, and it just unfortunately kind of starts unraveling because you touched on so many things there. You touched on land and lot, kind of supply and demand, there. Also around kind of interest rates, also the permitting issues. That great, here's a solution. So for your smaller to mid-sized builders, it is trying to maybe pack in more density and look at the smaller lots that maybe the larger national brands aren't looking at. But now you've got to go through working with local government and things of that nature to get that permitting done. So it seems like there's a stacking of, challenge and challenge. Where do you see kind of hey, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, with those challenges that, that builders on probably that small to mid-size are facing? And hopefully you're not going to say, well, there is no light.
No, there is. I believe there's still a place for that. And I think that the place is adjusting their business models to accommodate higher densities, because, they've spent generations building single family detached homes, whether they're on smaller lots, smaller parcels, or, as part of a bigger parcel, or, whatever. I think that they need to adjust to a higher density and look at infill and say, this is going to be where I can survive as a business, or basically be at the mercy of larger builders who are offering, a certain amount of lots to local builders to build, and just, and so there's opportunity there. But I think that really, those builders to some degree want to keep their own money. They want to build their own homes. They're diversifying into different types of housing, attached and detached, and it's and they want to they believe they're going to deliver more attainable housing through growth than through volume. So, which makes sense at a surface level, but I'm not sure it actually turns out that way. I think that, I think that, and I think the more that they gravitate to those infill lots, the more that smaller to mid-sized builders kind of look at that as a legit business model and can make it pencil. And I think the more pressure, because it's going to be more pressure on affordable, attainable housing in large markets where people want to live, that municipalities will say, yeah, let's work together to get this done. Let's make it attractive. Let's make it, pedestrian friendly. Let's make it, let's work together to make it great.
Right.
But we are going to approve higher densities because that lowers the cost of housing. That makes it more attainable for the people that want to live here or do live here. And that's a political pressure they're feeling.
Well, and I wanted to get your take on it. We've just in the short 15-ish minutes that we've been talking, we probably said affordable and affordable affordable housing, a handful to more than a handful of times. So has that target moved, and is it moving? Because the NAHB number with that basically saying that if we're looking at where affordability lies now, it's just the slightest changes move a large group of people out of being able to afford that home. So is it that we have to kind of rewrite our definition of what affordable looks like, or change the terminology, or what's your take on that?
Well, I think when you ask consumers, even Gen Zers and millennials, what they want in a house, they basically are all like, they have this American dream of a single family detached house, and that's fine, and that's going to be available to them at some point. What I would say is that we need to kind of adjust the mindset and say, look, if you want to be a homeowner, there's the entry points are these. They're condos, they're high density single family attached fourplexes, much more higher density, close to your neighbor, not a big yard, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, maybe a flex space that you can put in an office or something. But really, that's your entry point. And once you get in, then you trust that historically it will appreciate, that there won't be something like the market crash of 2007, 2008 that basically puts everybody underwater. And trust that it'll appreciate to the point where that you can then move up, into something that's a detached home or a little farther out, but still gives you that little bit bigger yard. You've got a family now, you want to have that, but you have to kind of adjust the mindset that your first buy isn't necessarily going to be a detached single family home, unless it's way, way out there, and even then probably priced right at the cusp of what you can afford, because wages aren't keeping up with costs. They're just not. But haven't been for generations. And so you're not looking at a generation that has the kind of, flexibility or ability that even I did when I was in my 20s and bought my first house, to afford anything. So I think we just have to kind of, everybody has to kind of come together and say, look, has to be the entry point. If we want to have people that are getting into the wealth building business of home ownership, we have to kind of adjust their mindset to where they enter and what they enter, and put them on that path. And instead of just, believing that we have to go more single family detached to get them in, because it's not affordable. So not, yeah.
Right.
And builders aren't building to that. Builders, even if they're out in the exurbs, they're not building affordable housing. They're building housing, that appeals to the next step in homeownership, not the first step.
Yeah, and I think from the lending side, where we're seeing it is that, yeah, we're trying to look at opportunities and ways to make those payments, make those homes affordable. Not that the home isn't out there tagged with like, okay, this is an affordable house. It's truly like sitting down with that client, and like you said, it's helping to set their expectations, and in some cases, it's resetting those expectations, but really working to find what affordability looks like to them. So we're trying to have more conversations and be very intentional about that with each of our clients. But it's kind of, I do feel like it keeps kind of moving a little bit. And some of the things that you touched on the opportunities that are out there that, maybe it isn't that detached, maybe it is, condo, townhome, something of that nature. Are you seeing, you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. Are you seeing a movement nationally around modular and even in the single wide, double wide, that movement as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, we need to decouple modular from HUD code. So let's just start there. I think that, HUD code has its place, and it's got its own challenges in terms of perception, consumer perception, political perception. I would say from a quality standpoint, HUD code has come a really long way. And frankly, I think it deserves another look in terms of, cities getting educated about, that type of house being built in their cities, in their municipalities. I think it's legit. It's a legit affordable housing option. It is, and it's not cheap. It's cheaply built. It's well built now. So there's that, but there's only 76 or 80,000 units being shipped every year now from that market, and which is down from a couple 100,000 or more,
Right.
A decade ago. So, or 2 decades ago. But in terms of modular and other offsite, we see a lot of interest, an increasing interest in that, but we're not seeing a lot of action. And the latest data from Census, which tracks this, and you can kind of argue whether it's completely accurate or not, but that's the only data point we have, is that roughly 3% of new homes built in 2024 were built either with panelized systems or modular. And so we're talking about really, really small, and that's been since, the high point of that was 7% in the late 90s. So we're not talking about something that's gaining traction. It's been 2 to 3% in the last, couple decades. So, so no, I don't see them moving to that. I see builders who are either forward thinking or in a position to make that kind of operational, because it's an operation wide change if you're going to go to something like modular or even panelized. I look at a company like Van Meter in Virginia, who has spent the last 15 or so years building up a way to deliver panelized and now modular cassette level modular housing for their projects, but it took them that long to kind of do it, in investment and in time and people and trial and error and failure and success. And they're finally kind of there. And their volume is going to go from a couple hundred to maybe 800 over the next couple of years. So that's how they're leveraging growth, is to build in, vertically integrated inside their company, and with a process that really, it's fairly unique in our industry. And that's how that
think about it. If I had told you back when you were having to watch, back in the 70s and 80s, when you were having to watch the Steelers beat up on your Raiders, if I had a vision that we'd be 3D printing a house, you wouldn't
Yeah.
have believed me.
No, no, and those niches are great, and I consider them to be, obviously even smaller market share than even modular or panelized. But I think that the more options that are out there. In fact, I just found out about a project in Houston, 80 unit project, 13 acres in Houston, where they're all going to be 3D printed.
Wow,
and
that's crazy.
and and that's the first 3D printed community. It's targeted to an affordable price point, affordable market. They're 1360 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, um, two different floor plans, but and tightly sided. But I think that that's showing me that that's legit technology that's going to be able to produce houses at an affordable level. And so, and obviously there's a lot more to it than that. There's, what was the political aspect of getting that project approved, and what was, all of that decision making. But their goal is to be affordable and to build with 3D. So I think, I think that, again, more options for attaining affordable housing is all good. And it's just a matter of, mainstream builders looking at those and saying, do we really want to build affordably? And if we do, what do we have to do to get there? You asked a question, leading up to this about, um, are builders, what are builders doing with rising construction costs? And it's ironic or coincidental that you asked that, because we have a little poll going on our website that closes Monday. And it's not statistically valid. It's like 100 people have answered it. But for the most part, builders are passing rising costs onto consumers. They're raising their prices to do that. Or they're going downstream and asking their trades and suppliers to cut their prices and be more cost efficient for them. So they're not really looking internally to save money. They're looking externally to consumers and to their trade partners and suppliers, which is kind of ironic, because they tell us that they want to streamline our operations, and that's the least likely scenario that they take to save money,
Right.
at least in this poll. So it makes me wonder, but I think that, we champion, talk about advocacy. We definitely advocate for looking at alternative construction methods to save time, save money, reduce waste, adjust to labor availability, adjust to rising costs. That's something we definitely advocate.
Yeah, I noticed from a lot of the conferences that it seems like from an exhibitor booth standpoint, they just keep growing and growing and growing. And a lot of those, sponsors, and of course we couldn't, everyone couldn't do all the things that they do without these sponsorships and support. When you look at the different, trades and vendors and technology and just all the different, platforms that are out there of tools and resources, it seems like there is this growing movement of exactly what you touched on, ways to create efficiency, add technology, adopt different, systems and processes, to streamline that. And that's what I'm kind of, seeing as we tour around and go to different conferences. And, with ProBuilder, I'm sure that you all have a number of, a number of supporters and kind of vendors in that space as well, when you're, putting on the different events that you're involved in.
Yeah, I think that, as if you've been in housing for 5 minutes, that housing's not been especially, as an industry, it's not especially innovative. Innovation doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen big. It happens, and it's mostly, I think, driven, at least in my time, by building codes and by product manufacturers and by technology companies who are trying to find a way in to get their products used by home builders who are, frankly, as a group, kind of stubbornly resistant to change. And I think the challenges that we have in this industry now, it just baffles me how few builders are like, I'm good. I'm like, I don't know how you're good. I don't get it.
Yeah.
And so the things when we talk about innovation in housing, it's engineered roof trusses, it's the use of OSB, it's pneumatic nailers, it's certainly codes have driven the efficiency of HVAC systems and even home automation control systems and things like that. Insulation is another one. I think that Those are important innovations. Those are important moves forward to achieve certain goals. But I don't know that, even AI or something like that is going to really move the needle of affordability. I think it's really more, just trying to get builders to be more efficient, and it all depends on adoption. It all depends on if the builder's really going to be willing to integrate that into their operations. And again, modular is one example, but almost all of these technologies to some degree require an operational change. And that's something I think builders don't really understand. I think that's why things like panelized and modular fail for some builders, is because they try to do it as a side gig. And really what they need to do is look at their operation and say, okay, we're going to go there like Van Meter did. We're going to go there, and it's going to take a while. It's going to take an investment, but we're going to get there because we think that's the way to build in the future. And if you try to tack it on to a typical production operation, and not change your overall operation, it's going to fail.
Yeah, it makes it difficult. And I will tell you, I don't argue the insulation permits and codes and requirements. The first house that I bought, I know that before the show we were kind of talking about our first homes, and the first home I bought was built in 1900, and we didn't know that they did not insulate the sidewalls. So being faced with those heating costs, that was definitely a shock to the system. So kind of live and learn on that.
Well, my home was built the home I built in now was built in 1975, and it's been upgraded to some extent with insulation, and we just put in a new heating and cooling system, but it's still inefficient. I mean, it doesn't even come close to what's being required now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know we're kind of getting close to the end here, but one thing I do want to touch on. So, with what we've talked about, there's a lot of back to that kind of like that pulling of the string, and there's a lot of unraveling or layering of the different issues that are out there. And I really appreciate how the way that you kind of scope that out is it looks like there has to be the acknowledgement of kind of like where you're at in the industry, where you're trying to go in the industry, and really planning that out and knowing the resources, tools that are available to you, and truly committing to a plan. So I know that as as editor, you probably have written a number of articles on it or talked about it, but can you kind of touch on where you see that collaboration, cohesion of builders and lenders, and how we if we're in this together, like how do we do a better job at helping both companies grow and kind of weather the storm and ultimately be successful?
Well, I think collaboration across all aspects of a home building operation, meaning everything from land acquisition through sales and post sales. I mean, I think collaboration with municipalities, with lenders, with certainly trade partners and suppliers, with and internally as well. I think it's just there are tools that enable that, and I'm hoping that builders will see that collaboration is the key to be sustainable as a business, and sustainable as a builder, and provide housing throughout this uncertainty, and even more so in this uncertainty economically. So, I don't have a silver bullet for how builders should work with lenders, but I think that, sometimes I don't want to say it's adversarial. You could answer that better than I could, but I think that it's really just like, coming into any conversation, with, the willingness to, I don't want to say compromise, because that's kind of a touchy word, but really just collaborate and say, what gets us to the best interest of both of us? Maybe I'm not going to make as much, but maybe the lender isn't going to make as much either, but we're able to kind of get this project off the ground and financed, and at the end, we're going to be happy with the result, because we're both going to be satisfied. Maybe not ideally, but we're still going to make money, and we're still going to be able to kind of keep the doors open. And I think that, you mentioned leading up to this, you kind of sent me some questions, and I think the term was creative mortgage products. So it gave me a little PTSD from the Great Recession, because my brother was a lender, and I remember him telling me, during that time before the crash, it's like they had something like 120 different mortgage products. And it was just like,
Yeah.
So, but I do think we need to be creative. I think that both sides need to be creative and open to new ideas and new ways to do things. And I think that, lenders can help builders, I think, move that needle to, well, if it's going to pencil out, you're going to have to build to a higher density. You're going to have to do this to make this work and for us to make it work. If you're coming in with a single family product on a 5-acre lot, that's just initial lot, that's not going to work. So how do we make it work for both of us? That it's a good risk for us as a lender and a good project for you as a builder that's going to be profitable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Rich, it wouldn't be a Lending Forward episode unless I asked you for the remainder of 2025, which is crazy. I still can't believe that that's the year we're in. How do you see yourself lending it forward for the remainder of the year?
I think just continue to be diligent about what we do and really keeping our eye on our audience, making sure that that's our first priority, that we're audience first. And then of course, like I said, being accurate and reliable, and authoritative to some degree with our audience, so that they have a respect for us and they rely on us. And then just being good storytellers. So, I just personally, I think that, I want to see, the world, be willing to adjust to changes that are just inevitable. I mean, we're living in a new world. I think there's so many that just want to get back to the old world. And it's like, that's not happening.
Yeah.
As much as you try to create it, it's not. And there's too much that's happened, even in the last 3 years or 5 years since the pandemic, that are just fundamentally changing things. I mean, birth rates and, household formations and macroeconomic factors that are just the new reality. And I want to see us kind of acknowledge that and move forward.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Rich, I don't know if we solved the world's problems around the builder industry today, but we did our best. We gave it that old college try. I really appreciate you coming on today, and you can check out Rich and the articles that he and his team put out there on ProBuilder magazine. Definitely check them out. Appreciate you coming on. Hopefully this is the beginning of a new relationship for us, and we can have you back on here down the road. But thanks again, Rich. Hope that all is well in your world, and may your pen always be full of ink.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure, and anytime.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining on this episode of Lending Forward.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the Lending Forward podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, follow us on Instagram @LendingForward, on YouTube and LinkedIn. Catch us every other Thursday with a brand new episode, and go lend something forward today. Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group, LLC, NMLS number 72043, NMLSconsumeraccess.org is an equal opportunity lender and employer. Located at 600 Lynn Haven Parkway, Suite 100, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452.